A few months ago, many elected officials signed a letter to the MTA to permanently extend the G back to Forest Hills. This was in response to the G train shutdown, and how, quote, the pain must correlate with the gain. And these elected officials are not alone. Many railfanners want to extend the G to Forest Hills. Some want to right a wrong, others want to extend the G somewhere for more one-seat rides. Since this keeps coming up in my comments and in discussions, let's go over whether the G should return to Forest Hills. The first I'm going to say is that under current terminating procedures, there's no way the G can make it to Forest Hills. Unless you want to make the M&R trains, the two services that riders love to complain about, even worse. That is because the MTA fumigates or inspects trains at the last stop. This extra time delays trains, which is why Forest Hills can only turn 20 trains per hour. While I think fumigation is unnecessary during rush hours, some people do. This is because it prevents passengers from panicking and pulling the emergency cord, which can further delay service. Though my counterpoint is that this can be mitigated by playing announcements. And in the event of a delay, there is another terminal to use, 179th Street. But my point is, unless the MTA reforms how they terminate trains, do not expect the G to come back to Forest Hills. And I've seen a few plans that would cut one service from QBL so that the G to Forest Hills can happen. A popular plan involves this. The E train would be unchanged. The F train would go via 53rd Street. The M train would end at 57th Street, 6th Avenue. The R train would be rerouted to Astoria. And the N train would go via 63rd Street to Forest Hills and run local. Advocates of this plan say that this would give Astoria full capacity while allowing the G to come back to Forest Hills. And if people want Manhattan-bound services, they can always choose three others. However, there are a few problems with this plan. The first one is that Astoria already runs at capacity. That is because the Ditmars Boulevard terminal is garbage and can only turn around 15 trains per hour. Yes, the N and W combined do 17. But remember, some of those trips actually begin at 96th Street on 2nd Avenue. Interlining the R in this instance actually boosts capacity in the 60th Street tunnel. There's also the fact that the R has no yard under this plan. The solution, as someone suggested, is to use the inner tracks on Sea Beach for access to Coney Island Yard. But that would make yard moves far more complex, and impacts the N train too. But what if you solved Astoria's terminal problem and built a new Astoria Yard? That seems doable. Well, you still have to contend with the third fact. You reduce service into Manhattan. Currently, about 50 trains per hour run into Manhattan on QBL. If there are only 3 services, that drops down to 40 trains per hour. Historically, that does not end well. Prior to 2001, when QBL did just that, the 53rd Street line got extremely overcrowded. 7.1 million hours annually would be spent in uncomfortable conditions. But with a 4th service added via the 63rd Street connector, crowding dropped drastically, down to 1.6 to 2.2 million hours annually, or a drop of 70 to 78%. Now, I don't think this is a one-to-one comparison as the 63rd Street connector is open, but I don't think decreasing Manhattan-bound service is a good idea. But I know what some of you are asking. What about extending G train service at night or on the weekends? There isn't the M train, so those extra slots can be filled by the G, right? Still no. Ever wonder why weekend service is garbage? It is because the MTA has a rule that you can't run more than 15 trains per hour on a 4-track trunk line during weekends and late nights. While I think during construction this rule is justified, this rule also applies when there isn't construction. So again, unless you want to make the E, F, and R trains even worse during the weekends, the G is better off staying at Court Square. But what if the MTA implements fumigation reform, or builds Queenslink, so that Forest Hills can turn more trains? Then they reform weekend service so that more trains can run on QBL. Now what? Extend the G to Forest Hills? Well, still no. Before you get your pitchforks, I have to ask, how many people will the G train to Forest Hills help? If you're looking at where people are going from QBL, you will very quickly find that there are few people that travel to Brooklyn, and that most people are heading to Manhattan. Now, if you flip it and see where G train riders are going, you will also very quickly find out people either work locally or in Manhattan. Very few people are even going to Queens. And if they are, it is in Long Island City, a location the G serves. So the G to Forest Hills doesn't even complement ridership patterns well. If anything, G train riders are heading the other way, requiring a transfer no matter what. So in the end, if the G train was to be extended, it would likely carry air past Court Square or Queens Plaza. My second question is, are there any consequences with routing the G to Forest Hills? For that, I say yes. I already gave one consequence, which is permanently reducing service to Manhattan. But there is a second, far easier answer: reliability. For some reason, the G train comes on time 90% of the time, on par with the L and 7 trains. While I am surprised that it is this high, it is helped that the G only interlines with one service, the F train. So the G is timed with the F train at Bergen Street, which is a far easier task than, say, the F train, where on top of Bergen Street, it has to be timed with M trains at Essex Street and E trains at 36th Street. But if the G train returns to Forest Hills, it has to be interlined with the most interlined line in the system. This means sharing tracks with the M and R trains, which adds another merge, limiting reliability. And let's say ridership grows on the M and R, which is going to happen as South Brooklyn and Bushwick continues to receive more developments. This means that the G will be squeezed even further. Or the G sees ridership growth, meaning the M and R will be squeezed. It is a lose-lose situation, where by extending the G, you waive your right to not only expand G train service, but also M and R train service. You know, the two services that run super frequently and no one complains about. So for the time being, the G should stay put at Court Square. If the MTA ever implements fumigation reform or builds Queenslink, it is better to try and boost M and R train service. Actually, the Myrtle Junction needs to be rebuilt. So really boost service on the R. Or add a V train via 63rd Street so that the F and M swap can be done. But that is outside the scope of this video. But my point is that boosting the M and R trains goes a longer way than extending the G back to Forest Hills. For one, it complements ridership patterns better. Crosstown and QBL traffic is Manhattan-centric, not going to Brooklyn. And for two, the M and R doesn't run good frequencies, and that is because Forest Hills is one major factor. So if anything, boost their service, which goes much further as you help out Brooklyn riders too. But I do concede one point. The G having 2 stops in Queens is a little wasteful. Ending it at Court Square does give some good options, but they consist of overcrowded lines, like the 7 in E. So a solution is, why not extend the G north into Astoria via 21st Street? This way, Astoria riders can connect into Brooklyn. G-train riders, in reverse, can pick a 63rd Street service. With beefed up M-train service, or a resurrected V-train via 63rd Street, that is more than enough capacity to siphon riders off of the 7 and E trains. However, there are a few drawbacks. The first one is, just like 2BL, Astoria traffic is also Manhattan-centric. This means fixing the poor switch layout at Ditmars, adding a yard, and reopening the lower level of City Hall should come first, as that addresses the needs of Astoria residents. The second one is, where at Court Square can you extend the G? Long Island City isn't exactly known for having an easy way to dig a tunnel, thanks to all of the existing train infrastructure. It is doable, as shown by the East Side Access, but that involves freezing the ground for extended periods of time. And also, for a sharp reverse curve, no thanks. What we can do is to build a branch of the G train just before 21st Street. This new branch could take multiple forms, like running under Vernon Boulevard or 11th Street before curving onto 21st Street. Stations could be placed at 50th Avenue for a transfer to the 7, 43rd Avenue for a transfer to a future 2nd Avenue Queens branch, and lastly Queensbridge for a transfer to 63rd Street services. Then the branch will head north serving Astoria, and end at 20th or 21st Avenue. This way, the G can also reach the proposed Astoria yard, and will give a G train an actual place to store trains. As for maybe extending the G to LaGuardia Airport, I don't think it is very necessary. For one, airport traffic is also Manhattan-centric, so Astoria service is better. But even if you want a circumferential service, which, fair enough, extending the IBX to LaGuardia Airport works better, as it connects to way more train lines. Now, if this 21st Street branch were to happen, I think pairing this with through service on the Franklin Avenue shuttle is best. For one, it would be a nice connection to central Brooklyn. But also, the G train interlining with the F down in Culver limits throughput to 15 trains per hour. And yes, Culver interlining is worth it. I will make a video on it one day. But by adding a branch, you are no longer constricted to 15 trains per hour, as that Franklin Avenue connection would add trains. But do not think this branch is going to be easy. Yes, this is probably the most feasible alignment. However, there are multiple deep level water crossings in the area, which means the G train branch is going to be extra deep. On second thought, it might work out better, as you can cut through the street grid with deep bore. But still, on the list of priorities I think the MTA should do, the G train extension is at the very bottom. I do see some value in it, which is why the G train extension is on the list of priorities, but at the end of the day, there are 1,000 other things the MTA should be doing, and I would like to see the MTA do those things first. In closing, why do we build transportation? To move people from one location to another. That is it. So if a location is no longer what people are going to, the transport system needs to be updated. For all of the MTA's faults, they understood the assignment in 2001, which is why they booted the G off of QBL. If you look at ridership patterns in 2002, we saw the same story as in 2024. Crosstown and QBL traffic is Manhattan-centric. And with that, that marks the end of this video. What are your thoughts on extending the G to Forest Hills? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.